So throughout the presentation, we will discuss the following. What is false allegations and reporting? Why does it occur? What to do when you have an allegation against you or your family? Investigation findings, prevention strategies, safety planning, and then support through an allegation. And if anybody wants to say something that isn't necessarily a question, you're more than free to do that as well. So what is false allegations and what do they entail? So they are untrue statements surrounding abuse. So this can be physical abuse, emotional abuse or psychological abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. False allegations within the adoptive and foster care world can be hard to avoid. I read multiple articles and I've heard from other people, you know, the statement of it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. I'm not saying all families are going to experience a false allegation in their life, but it's definitely a risk. And so that's why we wanted to touch on this, just so families kind of know what to expect if that were to happen. As mandated reporters, child welfare workers, including adoptive parents, foster parents, anybody who works with children, they need to take all allegations seriously as mandated reporters, even if they feel like it isn't a concern, or if they know that child has a history of reporting, that's still something they are obligated to take seriously. Aside from the physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect, we have also had experiences where youth have reported just from not feeling safe in the home. Not that they have experienced any sort of abuse, but maybe their adopted parents or foster parents make inappropriate comments that make them feel unsafe. And sometimes we just don't fully understand how that may sound to a child who has experienced different forms of abuse in their past. So aside from those, some inappropriate comments and actions can also make children feel unsafe. Why do false allegations occur? So I have quite a few on this slide, so we'll just kind of go through each one. Birth-family interactions. This can occur I've typically seen it occur when there's been unsupervised interactions or visitations with family members. Birth family can also report on foster parents or adoptive parents. You know, that may stem from not liking the foster or adoptive family, upset that their child is in care. You know, coming from a prior foster care case manager, I did work with a youth and we had just started unsupervised visits with mom. And the very first unsupervised visit, I came back to work on a Monday and mom wanted to talk to me. And she sat down with me and the youth and she kind of talked a little bit about how the youth was telling her some incidents that have happened in the foster home. But whenever I had asked the youth about it, she could never explain what happened. It always was coming from mom. Due to that, as a mandated reporter, I did have to, you know, report those incidents. But throughout the investigation, we did find that a lot of those reports that youth was saying, or reports that mom was saying, she was kind of coaching her daughter because mom was really upset that her children were in care. So I feel like I see that one quite a bit when it comes to reporting. Some families have great relationships with birth families, and that's awesome. And then sometimes they aren't so great. And so I do see a few different allegations come out of those. Certain allegations can occur from triggers. So, you know, certain smells or touches, different memories, they can come back to children at random times, and sometimes they can start to think of things to say. So triggers can be one. Playing out past trauma, confused memory, or misinterpretation. So specifically for the misinterpretation one, children can misunderstand a harmless action and interpret it as a harm. So for an example, maybe giving a child a back rub without approval or without their consent. You may think that's a very innocent gesture, I guess, but to that youth, that may be something that is intentional. And then they may feel like they're experiencing unsafe touches because it may be something that has happened in their past. I always like to just say, when a child does come into your home, it's important to ask what they're comfortable with. So, are you okay with hugs? Are you okay with holding my hand? You know, just different things, and making sure you're going at their pace. You know, the child can tell you what they're comfortable with, and some may say, yep, I'm fine with a hug as long as you ask me. And others might say, I don't feel like we're at that point yet. And that's fine. That doesn't mean that won't change in the future, but a lot of allegations can occur just due to people not being on the same page about what that child is comfortable with at that time. Sometimes it can simply be a way out of placement. You know, some kids may just not like where they are, and they know that if they create a report or accuse their family, they may be removed like they were in the past. Some may struggle with attachment issues. So with like forming attachment or bonds with another person can be threatening for those who live with abuse or who have lived with abuse. So they really like to keep people at a safe distance. They don't like to get too close or too comfortable. And when they feel themselves starting to get comfortable, they feel a need to, in a sense, sabotage and push away. You know, sometimes too, it might just be some kiddos trying to see what their parents are gonna, you know, how they're gonna stick with them if they are struggling with attachment. And you know, if they say, oh, I'm gonna accuse my parents of, you know, A, B, and C, how are they gonna respond to that? Are they gonna push me away? Are they very serious about me being here? So a lot of things can stem from attachment issues as well. Some of it can be control seeking. So control is a huge need for kids with trauma. Most likely have not had the control they need in their past environments, so they feel that if they do accuse their current caregivers of abuse, they may go back and live with birth family, or they may think, you know, if I can get out of this house where they don't let me do A, B, and C, I can go live with a new family that will have less rules, less structure, less routine, and it'll be better there. So some of it may be control-based. Hurt and anger. So some youth may be angry or upset with hearing or receiving the word no, kind of, you know, going back to that control-seeking piece as well, when they are wanting to do something. So they can accuse or make accusations as part of that defiance piece. And some of these things can happen unknowingly or unintentionally. So children may not understand that if they're just voicing their frustrations to someone, they may not understand that that could end up being a reportable event, and that may not have been their plan in the first place, and it ends up going to that. And I think another thing to point out to a lot of kids, especially maybe with the way out of placement or control seeking, or maybe some of the attachment stuff, you know, I think sometimes kids don't understand the long-term effects of what can happen if they do knowingly provide a false allegation. I think they are angry in the moment, they say what they need to say, and they don't understand how that can long-term affect a family, not only them, but the family they're placed with too. So what to do when an allegation occurs? So the first thing is stay calm, and I know that's way easier said than done when you're probably in that situation. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or a bad parent, but the most important thing to do is just not overreact, because you don't know where it's going to go. Overreacting can possibly make the situation worse, and that's not what we want to do. Also, don't blame. I know it would probably be easy to blame the child or the person who made the allegation against your family, but blaming won't help this situation. You can follow directions from the investigative agency, which is typically the county you reside in. A lot of times they'll ask for maybe some documentation or different things they need, so providing them with what they're looking for. You can also seek legal assistance if needed. Mike Berry, we reference him a lot in Post-Adopt. He is a foster and adoptive parent who does multiple trainings. He holds different retreats. But he recommends seeking legal assistance if you ever find yourself in this situation. This can occur, the legal assistance can be sought after the investigation is complete, and maybe you did receive a services required report. Or it can be before, depending on your individual situation. Some families might already have kind of attorneys in mind of who they want to work with if this were to ever happen. Some families don't feel the need to seek legal assistance. It's kind of a personal preference, but it can be helpful if you ever find yourself in this situation. Another thing that you can do is have another person present, such as a spouse or a family friend, a supportive team member. They can be really helpful to, if allowed, sit in on the investigation and tell you how it went. Unless it's a spouse, they're probably not going to be able to say a whole lot because it's, they're not part of the investigation. But having that third party person there can help provide some feedback on how the meeting with the investigative agency went. They can also be kind of a witness and a third party person to hearing what was said as well. Always ask lots of questions so you understand everything. You can ask them to talk in terms that you will understand. Just make sure you understand everything as clearly as you can, to know what's going on with that. And then one of the most important things is to document everything. This can include interactions with the investigator, phone conversations, interviews that you're a part of, any correspondence with email, text message, anything like that. Pretty much anything that you feel would be beneficial to keep track of, you can document that. Depending on the agency you might be working with, you could even possibly record in-person and phone conversations. I think documentation can just be really beneficial in the case that you would ever need to provide any sort of documentation in the instance that the case would go to court. At least you would have some sort of paper trail, and this is when you talked to who, and this is what was talked about, and this is what you were told, and so forth. So documentation is a really big piece if you ever find yourself in this situation. So investigation findings. So there can be two different findings. So the first can be a services required findings, And then the other one can be a no services required. So if the allegation is found to be true, that is what would be considered the services required. So these are some outcomes of what could possibly happen if you do find yourself in this situation with a services required outcome. Children can be removed. You could possibly need to do parenting classes. You may get a criminal charge depending what the accusation was. If you are foster care licensed, you could possibly lose your license, or your license could be put on probation or on hold for a time being. I think it's really important to note here that even if you do receive a services required, that does not necessarily mean that your children will be removed, or it doesn't mean you may get a criminal charge. Sometimes it just means that the court and the county would like you to have additional supports in the home. So for an example, if a parent is restraining a youth during a violent outburst, so they're hitting and they're kicking, and you feel that your family's in danger, and someone puts that child in a hold, and there might be bruises on that child's arm or their shoulders, something happens where they get a bruise, it might be recommended by the court or by the investigative agency that the family has more training on restraints, or more training on crisis de-escalation. They may want the family to maybe do some respite care, maybe have some additional services with in-home therapy, anything like that. So even if you do have an allegation completed, an investigation comes out and says you have a services required report, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to result in some of these more serious cases. It can just mean that they're looking for some additional supports or different education or training events to help manage those in the future. So if it's found to be false, that would be no services required. So that will likely occur if there's not enough evidence, or they felt like the child that reported or whoever reported, and they talked to all team members, they feel like there's not enough to say that this family does need a required services report. You know, they may still recommend that you do some classes or you complete certain trainings, but it's not a requirement. It's just kind of a recommendation. But that obviously doesn't take away all the feelings you might have experienced during the investigation, such as like angry or sadness or hurt by whoever filed the 960 or the allegation. So there's just two different investigation findings with those. So no services required. And another thing I want to note in regards to whatever investigation finding comes out of it, you should always receive a copy of the report from the county agency in regards to the outcome of the investigation. So it will either state that they investigated and they talked to whoever they needed to talk to, and it will say whether it's a services required report or no services required report. And every family, if you're caught into an investigation, every family should receive one of those reports. If you don't receive one, I would definitely recommend reaching out to your county agency and having one sent to you. Those are just good to keep on hand for documentation if it were to ever happen again. I know as a previous PATH worker, I received all reports on any of my foster families that were filed. I always received a letter back stating their findings, and it's just good to keep on file. So if you ever don't receive one, I would definitely recommend reaching out and getting that from them. So how can we prevent or avoid allegations? So like I kind of said in the previous slide, documentation is probably the most important piece to prevention. It may not fully prevent an allegation, but it can definitely help you if it does occur. So keeping a journal to document any concerning behaviors such as sexual acting out behaviors, changes with behavior, inappropriate language or actions during birth family contact, maybe documenting behavior following birth family visits, the cause of scratches or bruises, other injuries that may occur, behaviors around a certain time. Some kids can really struggle with certain holidays or certain anniversaries or birthdays, anything like that. I worked with a foster family at PATH, the same one I was previously talking about in the beginning of the presentation, and we ended up making a plan that they would document everything that occurred and send it to me. So kind of at the end of each day, they would write how the day went or if they struggled with anything. You know, if one of the kids at daycare got a bruise, they sent me that incident report right away. Documenting those pieces and sending them to any team member. I mean, that can be, if you are working with social workers, I mean, it could be a social worker, it could be a therapist, it could be a school personnel, a doctor of some sort. So just keeping other team members in the loop about different things can really help prevent a false allegation because most team members will already know about it. So in that specific case, me already knowing about it beforehand, I already knew what happened. So if that birth mom had come back to me and say, you know, I had my visit with so-and-so and I found another bruise on her, then I can go back and be like, yep, foster parents told me, this is what happened. They told me about it right away. So just documenting it and then sharing it with team members if you are feeling like this may happen to you at some point is really important to do so. So the next one I have discussing with team members, which I kind of already talked about, and that can be any team member. Safety planning, we will discuss safety planning on the next slide. Obviously, never use physical discipline with kids who have experienced some of the trauma that our kids have in the past. Be clear on rules for dressing, privacy, touching. That kind of goes back to, are you okay with hugs? Are you okay with me holding your hand? Are you okay with me giving you a back rub? You know, those sorts of things. Just making sure you know what that child is comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with from the very beginning. Setting clear family rules, expectations, consequences for misbehavior. Another good one to look into is to become knowledgeable about your area's child protection laws, county procedures for investigations, and different resources available for families. And then if possible, get written documentation of any prior instances of reporting on caregivers for that youth in your home. It is sometimes difficult to know everything about a youth's past. And so that may not be known to anybody, and that may, you know, false allegations may occur when you're not expecting it, but just because it's never happened doesn't mean it won't happen. But if possible, it is really important to get that documentation prior to having that child in your home, just so you know that, hey, this did occur. This is what we can expect. These are steps we're going to take to help us, you know, not have a false allegation. And if that allegation occurs, how are we going to manage that? But like I said, that's not always a possible thing to do. If someone who is comfortable, can you tell me if my next slide switched to safety planning?
Yes, it did.
Okay, perfect. It's just stuck on my end, so it shows that it hasn't switched. Thank you. Safety planning. So safety plans do not have to be complicated. They also do not necessarily prevent an allegation, but they can help prevent you or protect you in the long run. It's important to establish a safety plan when a child enters your home from the very beginning. And safety plans are what we expect to happen and what will happen if that doesn't occur. So I'll give you an example on the next slide too. But documentation is just a good way to provide, like a good example to provide to the investigating agency of these are things we may be struggling with, these are things we're working on, here's our safety plan. I'm going to reference Mike Berry again here. Once again, he is a foster and adoptive father himself, but he recommends utilizing and referencing safety plans whenever you can. Like I said, they don't have to be complicated. They can be very basic, very simple to follow. But he's told stories of himself, him and his wife having false allegations on their family. And what he does is he creates safety plans for each area that some of their children may be struggling with. And when those allegations have occurred on his family, he hands that over to him, to the investigative agency, and just kind of says, here's things we're struggling with. This is what we're working on. This is our plan. This is how we handle, whatever behavior it may be. And they kind of go from there. So here, Mike Berry also has created the Trauma Knowledge Masterclass. I'm not sure if any of you have attended, but that's the class that we teach with post-adopt. So he has created that. But here is a safety plan for physical aggression. So these are just, this is an exact example of what Mike Berry uses, an example he provided to some of our post-adopt families who have attended our summer camp. So this is coming directly from him. So with one of his kids, they struggle with physical aggression. So these are the steps that they take and the expectations and the rules that they want to follow with that physical aggression piece. So we respect other people. We keep hands and feet to ourselves. If physical hurt is happening, other children will leave the room and go to a safe place if possible. When I am, so talking about the child, about to do something hurtful, I will use my coping skills or a coping skill. If I, the child, have hurt someone, I will make amends. And then his last one is if a coping skill isn't working, you call for help. So that can be a mentor, a therapist, crisis line, police officer. If they have a good family friend that child has a good relationship with. Anyone that can help assist the escalation and helping that de-escalate. Can also call for help keeping the other children safe if necessarily, if they need to leave the home or if they need to just have support from what might be going on in the home. So that is an example of a safety plan from Mike Berry. Like I said, he very much recommends creating safety plans. Once again, not that it's going to prevent an allegation, but it can definitely help protect you. To just show people, like, yep, we know this is a thing, but here's what we've been doing. I was also going to mention, and I think I had mentioned it earlier, but it's really important to establish a safety plan when a child enters your home and update that as things arise. So maybe physical aggression, for example. Maybe physical aggression was a big issue when that child came into your home, and we're, a year down the road, and now there's no more physical aggression. So maybe you just change some of that wording, or we create a new safety plan in regards to a different behavior that might be happening. Your post-adopt coordinator is also able to help assist families in creating safety plans if that's something families are looking for and wanting help with, and they just don't really know where to start. Your post-adopt coordinator in your region is able to help create those with you. Support groups. Support groups can be a really good outlet for if your family is going through an allegation or an investigation, or struggling, or you may feel that something may be coming up, but they can offer just a sympathetic ear, listening ear for you. They do, it is intended to stay neutral, so we wouldn't be taking any sides in terms of one agency is right or one agency is wrong. It's staying neutral to help prevent some of those disagreements back and forth. They can also be a good way to share information and resources. And then they can also assign a mentor family. Maybe us as post-adopt coordinators know another family who has went through the same thing. They went through that allegation and investigation, and they received the report of no services required, and they've worked through all those emotions that an investigation can put you through. And so sometimes families find it really helpful when we're able to assign a mentor family to them, just to kind of be that extra support, because not everyone is going to understand what it feels like to go through an investigation. So we can definitely help connect families with that as well. And that is it. This is my references and resources. I went through that a little bit quickly, just so I didn't end up losing connection with anybody. I kept getting a little bit of a feedback on my end in regards to core connection. So I kind of went through that a little bit more quickly, but does anybody have any questions or statements or things they want clarified or anything like that?
Yeah, I think I had one question. During the false out or during any allegation, I should say, is the caseworker and the team, they all have to remain neutral during while the investigation is ongoing, correct?
Correct. Are you talking in regards to like a foster parent standpoint?
Yeah, I guess I am. I'm thinking more like a foster parent. Sorry, I should have said that up front.
No
Um,
worries.
yeah, like so during that time when if you have a foster child with you, does the caseworker and anyone who's on that team, do they have to maintain a neutral perspective until the investigation is complete?
They do. So just, a little example, as a prior foster care case manager, if it got to a point where I ever had to report on a foster parent, we aren't legally allowed to tell them that there's an investigation or that we reported a 960 to the county. And I don't know if that's out of fear that maybe there would be some coaching by foster parents, but kind of, the agency I worked with, part of our policy was that, like I just said, if we did have to file anything, we couldn't disclose that. We definitely could when the investigation was over. But yes, social workers typically do need to stay neutral in that situation. And it can be hard because foster parents can be kind of confused on like, oh, why is communication cut back a little bit, or why isn't so-and-so talking to me as much as they normally would, or, and mostly foster parents start to understand what's happening when someone from the CPS unit at each county reaches out to them wondering, setting up a time for an investigation or an interview. So yes, we do have to stay pretty neutral in that. Even if it might be a situation where we don't believe that it's true, we can't necessarily not file because we might believe that. Does that make sense, or does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
As related to that, then, does anything do so again from the foster perspective, like does the visitation schedule change at all because of that?
It, like with birth family?
Yeah, like if we have we have visitation scheduled on like Wednesdays and Fridays or something like that. Like, does the visitation schedule or does anything like that change because of the investigation, or do things remain as consistent and as normal as possible while the investigation is ongoing?
Right. We try to keep things as consistent as possible, depending on what type of allegation was reported. We may get direction to put some of that stuff on hold, but we really do like to try to keep the consistency and the structure and the routine the same for the kids. But like I said, depending on what that investigation looks like, or what kind of direction we're getting from the county workers, that may look different, but we do try to keep it generally the same, just to provide that structure and routine that they need.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. But that's all dependent on, the agency you're licensed with, and the custodial team of that child too. So, whatever region of North Dakota you're from, that may look a little bit different, maybe in a different region. But I would think it would really depend on what type of allegation occurred, and how they're wanting to handle that. Because sometimes too, depending on what allegation it might be, sometimes foster kids, while that investigation is ongoing, might be removed from the foster home until the county and CPS unit can determine if it actually occurred or not. So it all comes kind of from the Human Service Center, and if they want the children to be left in the foster home during the investigation, or if they think it would be best for them to maybe go to a respite home. So I would think it really just depends on the situation, and if the kids are allowed to stay in the foster home, or if they need to leave, and kind of what that looks like.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Perfect.
I had one last question, and I don't mean to hog the time.
No worries.
So in my family's particular situation, we have two birth children.
Mm-hmm.
How, during an investigation, how are they involved? What are some of the implications for having birth children during that process?
So the most I've seen with involvement with birth children is maybe the CPS worker who is investigating the incident. They may just ask birth children if they saw anything or if this did occur. But most of the times, in terms of like removal or anything, I've never seen any issues with that. Like I said, they may just ask them a few general questions, being they live in the home. But I feel like that would probably be the furthest they would go. If anyone else has different experience with that or know of anything different, feel free to chime in. But the foster families that I've worked with that have had 960s reported on them, nothing major has ever occurred with birth children. Most of the time, like I said, it might just be a general question here or there, but it hasn't been anything extreme. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. What area, if you don't mind me asking, what area from North Dakota are you from?
We're in Bismarck.
Bismarck, okay.
Yeah.
Those are all really good questions. And like I said at the beginning, I don't mean to scare anyone or make it seem like foster care or adoption like it's going to happen. But it can happen, and we just want families to be prepared and kind of know a little bit about what your options are if an investigation were to happen, and how to be prepared a little bit, for the process if it were to happen for you. So I don't mean to scare anyone or anything like that. It's just wanting families to be prepared for something that, is hard because it may or may not happen. So. Perfect. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, I will end the meeting for all of us. But if you want any additional follow-up, please let me know. You can also, if you are finding yourself in a tough situation or you just want some clarification on anything or more support or direction on how to handle something, you can definitely reach out to your post-op coordinator in each region. I know where most of you guys are region-wise, so if you don't know who your worker is, I can definitely help you get in touch with them. But yeah, if you have any questions or want to talk about anything outside of the meeting, please feel free to send me an email, and I will put my email in the chat box real quick for you guys. So if you ever want to talk about anything else, or like I said, if you want to talk about something that maybe you weren't comfortable sharing, anything like that, please feel free to email. We can definitely touch base outside of this time too. So perfect. Well, I hope everyone has a great rest of their night. And like I said, let me know if you have any other further questions. Thank you for participating.